a very quite emotionally charged affair where we're positioned. So we do understand that this is a time where quite a number of dignitaries will start trickling in here at the Air Force Base. But it's really quite a very important moment as well, especially for the families, because we do understand this is the time, really. This is where the reality really will just hit home, especially because they made numerous pleas to the South African government to make sure that this day finally comes where the mortal remains are brought to the country. But obviously, Nazi, this moment really, there has been a number of steps where we're seeing today. We've seen a number of meetings being held in a number of capitals where the leaders from the SADC region, you go back to 2023 in Windhoek when the SADC leaders took all that important decision for the deployment of SAMI DRC to join their counterparts, of course, from the UN mission, that is MONUSCO, to be part of the mission to stabilize the restive parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, an era really that United has been facing the challenge of insecurity for a number of years. I mean, it goes back to the very remnants of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, but also the tension as well around the ethnic groups around that particular area. But as you know, I mean, that's a very rich part of the DRC in terms of the minerals, but we're not really where we're positioned. It's quite a very important area because this is where the dignitaries will start arriving. As you know, that the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa had to move this particular program. It was supposed to be at 9 a.m., but it had to be moved to 6 p.m. because obviously quite a number of issues he's attending in the country, running the state, but of course prioritizing this particular ceremony as well. As you know, that he called these soldiers the gallant fighters who are trying to maintain peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when you go back to that 2003 Defense Mutual Pact, where the SADC leaders only say that if there is an attack in country A, there must be a response, the collective responsibility in terms of making sure that they address all of this. But of course, we know that Africa, when that is on the journey for around development, it's a very key issue. So peace and security is very, very key in that regard. But most importantly, Unati, we know that a lot of calls have been made around the ceasefire in the eastern parts of Congo. We saw where the M23 had a unilateral decision where they had a ceasefire, but of course it was really short-lived because after a couple of days we saw the skirmishes just breaking out. So by all means, Unat, it's going to be a very important occasion for these families as they seek closure. But we do understand, Unat, it's going to be quite a process in terms of the verification and making sure that they identify these bodies. But of course, Unati, I'm not really by myself here. It's a wall-to-wall coverage from SABC. Now let's hear from my colleague Criselda Lewis, what she has from her side. Criselda, what's happening from your end?
As I already indicated, we're expecting the families of the fallen soldiers to arrive any minute now at the Air Force Base, Swartkops. This is, of course, in Centurion. And we're expecting the families to be transported in 2 buses. A bit earlier on today, they identified the remains of their loved ones. And I guess this is a moment of some closure for the families. Who've been waiting. It's been a painful wait for these families to receive the remains of their loved ones. We've not yet seen an official program at this particular stage, but of course proceedings will be led by the Commander-in-Chief, President Cyril Ramaphosa. The Defense Minister, Angie Motshekga, also expected to be part of the proceedings here today. But the families, of course, the most important. This handover ceremony for them will signify the moment that they receive the remains of their loved ones. And I see at this particular stage, not perhaps, there are quite a number of dignitaries that are also expected in attendance at this handover ceremony, as well as the memorial service. The expectation is also from these families wanting to bury their loved one. But support, we do understand, has been given to these families from the point of the announcement of the death of these soldiers. When that news breaks to their families, continuous support is given to them. And we understood many of them to have asked questions about what happened to their loved ones. That would have been a sense of closure for them. If you've just joined us here on SABC News, this is live coverage of the official handover of the remains of the 14 fallen soldiers to their families back on South African soil. Back on South African soil. And also an indication that, of course, we know President Cyril Ramaphosa will be part of today's procession. I've just seen some of his aides arrive here, an indication that perhaps by now he is on his way. Of course, he had been at that State of the Nation address reply since this morning. But of course, the presence of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces critical. And the families would see that as an important and significant in thanking these fallen soldiers for the contribution that they have made towards peace, stability, and security on the continent. All right, Kaya, I am not sure if you're still with me. at the stage. My colleague Kaelihle Kumalo is also part of our special broadcast here together with SABC News international editor Sophie Mukwena. I'm not sure if Kaelihle Kumalo can hear me at this stage. Kaya, let me hand over to you on the other side.
Well, certainly, Criselda, thank you so much. A very poignant moment here at the Air Force Base. Really, you can really tell that it's quite a very tense atmosphere where really the families really will face that reality. We know that it's been a very agonizing period from that time when they were pleading with the authorities to make sure that this day really do come into existence, but also by all means. And now it's a very critical moment. With few minutes to 6 p.m. we know that's when the official proceedings will actually commence. But I'm really going to step out of the short, Unatsu, because where we're positioned really it's an area where we're expecting a number of dignitaries to arrive at in terms of the proceedings. We know that the Commander-in-Chief, the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, will come through as well here. We know that he has been really working so hard with his counterparts in East Africa, really just having a telephonic conversation with his Rwandan counterpart, President Paul Kagame, and many other regional players as well. As we know that the eastern parts of DRC, there are so many parties that are involved in terms of that conflict, but also seeking peace, a long-lasting peace. That's the quest that everybody's yearning for in the continent. And we know that, Sunati, this coming weekend is going to be a very important time in terms of the African Union summits coming up in Addis Ababa. And one of the major issues that will feature quite prominently, of course, is the current situation in the eastern parts of DRC. As you know, that also the leaders will face a big responsibility of electing a new chairperson for the commission. And we know that the Angolan president, João Lourenço, is going to take over as the African Union chairperson. We know it's a rotational position. And he's going to inherit this very, very big issue around the insecurity in the DRC. But to reflect as well, maybe just to get some pointers as well, some pearls of wisdom. Joining us now is, of course, Sophie Mukwena, once again, our very own international editor here at the SABC. So, Sophie, we know that we are edging close to 6 p.m., a very important moment. Your reflections at this point?
I think we are edging closer to that moment where we will see the families for the first time. As you can see now, the members of the South African National Defence Force is arriving. As you hear that music, the band there went there to speak to them. This is the South African National Defence Force with different units: the Navy, the military, the Air Force, the medico, that is those doctors and nurses. So they've put together a choir, and it represents all the different units of the South African National Defence Force. And I can see also just behind those men and women in uniform, the dignitaries are beginning to arrive. And I think from here, they are going to go to this hangar. As you can see, we have hangar 5 there, Kaya. This is where the families are going to be, and also where the president will have a private moment with the families. As we know that they arrived yesterday, they slept in Pretoria. The Minister of Defense did visit them at the hotel last night to engage with the family. So we are really approaching that moment. And one thing also that was touching, Kaya, near the choir You have pictures of those fallen heroes there and the candles, and you can see the pictures. You can see that these were South Africans in uniform, even though it is a very somber moment here at the Air Force Base.
And certainly, so we know that since the advent of democracy, it's been quite a long journey for the South African National Defence Force in terms of really transforming itself as a peacemaker, as opposed to the previous regime where we saw those raids in the frontline states. But now it's a new chapter where we're trying to maintain peace. We saw Samim, the SADC mission in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado. We saw them in Burundi. We saw them in Liberia. We saw them in Darfur, really just once again emphasizing these blueprints that we have, that we want to be a peace broker, and that's a very key role that we have.
Yes, you are correct, Kaya. When the president was speaking towards the end of his speech in Parliament today, he did touch on that, but also when he made an example of how South Africa was able to integrate different forces, those statutory and non-statutory forces, to form the new South African National Defence Force. The inclusivity is quite important when you embark in a process of transformation of any nation. If you leave certain people behind, you will always experience instability. So I think on that front, South Africa was able to integrate the forces, and therefore we haven't seen the South African National Defence Force behave in the manner that's questionable in relation to defending the democracy. I just want to make one big example that people might have forgotten, or perhaps young generation were not ready to consume that content at that time. You would recall when the former South African president was recalled, the senior personnel of the army went to him to say, but this is a coup. So what must we do? Because our responsibility is to ensure democracy and to defend the flag. As our commander-in-chief, Mbeki said, no, go back. I will assist my party, the ANC, to do things in a right way. So that moment, they engage him to get clarity whether what's happening at that time, was it a democratic process, and how does a country ensure that this is done in a democratic way? When we saw the second recall, South Africa had then had experience in terms of how do you ensure that all the institutions of democracy, even when the president is recalled, do hold. And it's something that we don't often talk about, how the South African National Defence Force just kept to their responsibility and didn't entangle themselves in the politics of the governing party on two occasions. And also, one thing that we tend to forget, they had their forebears who perished during SS Mendi, who taught them to behave in a particular manner. As we know that at that moment when that ship was sinking, they prayed and they accepted their fate. So still, again, being disciplined, even though at that time they were not the formal force. So South Africa has come a long way, and now sharing the expertise with the continent is what is happening. That's why the president last week in Tanzania said to all stakeholders there, look, even ourselves, we had to sit down with our enemies and to find a better way to ensure that we have a democratic dispensation. And I think you, Congolese, must take leave from that lesson.
And obviously, Sophie, South Africa has been a very key player in the DRC. I mean, we go back to those days of Mobutu Sese Seko, of Laurent Kabila, of Joseph Kabila, and to this point now with the Tshisekedi, South Africa has been a very key investor. I mean, you talk about the development, Grand Inga Dam on its own, you look at the hydroelectric project, very, very beneficial for the African continent. And I suppose to get to that point, peace and security is incredibly important.
You are correct, Kaya. You'd recall when we were putting together that package on the former founding father of Namibia, Sam Nujoma, we came across a meeting that Madiba had with Sam Nujoma where they were talking about the DRC. So the DRC crisis has been there, and South Africa has sought to try and assist the continent to resolve this problem, including the countries in the Great Lakes region. And therefore, all the leaders of South Africa post-1994 have been involved in trying to assist. And this is where we are. I mean, South Africa was there assisting Liberia, Ivory Coast, South Sudan, now recently in Cabo Delgado, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, in terms of pushing for negotiations and peace. But in the Great Lakes region, you've had this massive deployment for many years under MONUSC, under the auspice of the United Nations, until recently with the summit DRC.
All right. Thank you so much indeed for that insight. Of course, that's our very own SABC, Sophie Mokoena, the international editor, really reflecting on the context. A very important day as South Africa is paying homage to these 14 soldiers who died in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But also, you remember during the course of the State of the Nation address where President Cyril Ramaphosa said the presence of South African peacekeepers in Congo is all about a commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflicts, but of course admitting that it remains a very intractable conflict. So we'll certainly be here throughout the night to give you all the developments here from the Swartkop Air Force Base. So with that, back to you in studio.
Kailihle Khumalo there live for us at the Swartkop Air Force Base.